Good evening and welcome to Power Parsha Proles. And what we're going to look at tonight is the opening, the very opening of this week's Torah portion, which says very simply, if you keep my statutes and you adhere to my commandments, that's the opening. Now, obviously, that begs an immediate question. What is the essential difference between a commandment and a statute? And why does the verse choose to separate the two? Well, as we can well understand, a commandment is a rational principle. Things that pretty much make sense to us, where even if the Torah had not commanded it, we would be inclined to adhere to it anyway because it's practical for life and conducive to society. It works well in the framework of what we might otherwise call social contract. But what happens if everything is left to our own whim? If we do things only based on our own rationale, then invariably we accept those things that appeal to our sense of logic, and we will reject outright those things that we might find absurd or incomprehensible. But that then is not really religion, is it? That's got nothing to do with religion. That's just a pick and mix lifestyle, because religion, by its very definition, is, to paraphrase a former American president, think not what God can do for you, but what you can actually do for God. And so in this context, or in our context as well, God insists of us that you should do what don't think about what God could do for you, but what you can do for God. That's why we have statutes, not irrational laws, but super-rational laws. In other words, to condition ourselves, again, not to think about what can God do for me, but what I can do for God, even if it doesn't make sense. I mean, there's a logic to them, albeit one incomprehensible to the human mind. Which then begs another question. If there is a logic to them, if there is a reason I cannot mix milk and meat, if there is an explanation as to why I cannot eat horse meat, or why I shouldn't mix wool and linen into one garment, then why not just tell me the reason in the first instance? And the answer is because we need to condition ourselves to appreciate that life isn't always about getting it. It isn't always intended to be dictated by the mind. Sometimes there has to be a little lessening of the ego where the world doesn't just revolve around you, what you like, what you want, but what someone else would like of you and wants from you. Sometimes you have to do what you have to do, regardless of how you feel about it, because you know ultimately it's the right thing to do. And that applies, of course, not just in the context of religion, but in our personal relationships and friendships and our life goals. What are the two most common quotes uttered on the lips of people, which encapsulates the apathy that so erodes people's lives? One is, I'm not in the mood, and the other is, I can't be bothered. Problem is that when you're no longer in the mood, or you can no longer be bothered, then the end result is that you stop investing the time, the energy, the heart, and the soul, and frankly, I don't have to tell you where that leads, in any sphere, in any dimension of our reality. My grandfather used to say, before marriage, he'll walk to the other end of the world for you. After marriage, he won't even go to the local grocery store. Plain and simply put, before marriage, he's interested in attracting you, so he wants to make a big impression. He'll do whatever needs to be done. Maybe after marriage, apathy sets in. She's not in the mood. He can't be bothered because you get to a stage where, okay, we are where we are now, so I don't have to apply the same effort. And at every given point in life, sometimes even if you're not in the mood, be bothered. I remember Rabbi Dr. Ivan Lerner telling over a story some 20 plus years ago, which he had witnessed firsthand. There's a shop in Bondi Beach in New South Wales, Australia. And there's an in-town beach where you get a unique mix of swimwear-clad people and Hasidic people. They don't typically go together. But in the middle of this, there's a kosher shop called Krinsky's. And it would be frequented by both brands of people, those coming off the beach as well as the Hasidim. So try and picture this scene as it really happened. Bikini mom comes in, child in tow. And as they reach for the shopping carts, the child notices the rows of sweets, of candy, conveniently and strategically placed right next to the carts. Child says, Mommy, can I have this sweet, this candy? Mommy says, no. Child goes into an immediate tantrum, screaming the shop down as the mother drags him along down the aisles. In walks Hasidic mom. She too reaches for a shopping cart, and exactly the same scene unfolds. Child, Mom, can I have this candy? Now, not all the sweets are necessarily supervised kosher, so Mom says, no, it's not kosher. Kid looks and says, okay, and they walk on. But children are eminently brilliant. And so this child is not about to relent. And even as Bikini Mom is still struggling with a tantrum, the child's lungs still going strong, Hasidic Mom is taking her child, walking through the aisles, and the kid lets go. And the kid goes to retrieve another sweet in the hope of evoking a more favorable response. But that too was met with the same answer: sorry, son, it's not what we eat. And then all of a sudden, Hasidic Mom's kid has his radar on full gear and suddenly observes how a Hasidic man walked into the shop and immediately reaches for a chocolate in another tray further up. The child zeroes in, goes for the same tray, grabs the chocolate, checks it out, heads back to his mom and says, "Can I have this? It's kosher." It's got the label on it. Hasidic mom looks at him and says, "No." And guess what happens? This kid goes into a tantrum, and now you've got two screaming children all over the aisles. The question is this: what changes within this child? Why does this child accept the it's not kosher, but goes crazy at the mere no? And the point is that both children are raised knowing that you could always negotiate a no, maybe through a tantrum or whatever else besides. But what this one child knows, however, is that you could never negotiate a mitzvah. You can't negotiate kosher. It's not as if his mother ever said to him, "Oh, if you behave, I'll let you have a little kosher later on." The kosher was an absolute. Even 3-year-old children understand the restrictions of the absolute, because when parents convey it, they exude confidence. The child knows and senses when mom and dad say no to certain values, and they do so with absolute conviction, no less than you would tell a child, "Don't run on the road." But the child also knows and senses how the parent might not exude the same confidence when it comes to the yes or no of other values, and that therefore remains eminently negotiable. So when we waver in our communication, because maybe it's not an absolute by us, then we shouldn't be surprised if later it wavers within others as well. Unless we have conviction, then in our context of our children, they won't have the assurance necessary to differentiate between right and wrong, between what is deemed appropriate and acceptable and what is not. And the point is one and the same. We're all kids at heart. And we all have to condition ourselves to sometimes reach beyond our comfort zones, to have some absolutes in our lives. It doesn't mean we're programmed robots any more than a child is when responding to a parent's behest. It just means that your job in this global conglomerate is to not always understand necessarily what your boss wants, but you do your job because you appreciate you're an integral cog of the machine that makes the business work. In the timeless logo of Nike, just do it. You know, there's a guy I know called Lawrence. Lawrence is a member of my synagogue who runs a menswear shop in the city of London. It's not a particularly big shop, but he's seen tremendous success out of it. Many years ago, there was a fire in King's Cross train station, one of the biggest stations in London, and as a result, they determined that they needed new emergency exits, and one of them would have effectively opened directly into where Lawrence's shop is. So they served him a forced possession order where they would effectively force him to sell a shop to them in order to build this emergency exit. So he had a closing down sale. Everybody loves a closing down sale. Everybody shops at a closing down sale because even though the price has been marked down from a 400% markup to a 350% markup, in your mind, you're still getting a bargain. So they served him that forced order, but they ended up doing the exits elsewhere. And yet they kept that order in place just in case. And God bless the British, for 18 years, Lawrence was legally allowed to have signs in his shop and holding a closing down sale. Several years ago, when that sale finally ended because some bureaucrat somewhere realized the clerical error, Lawrence came to me on a Shabbat at the Kiddush. "Rabbi, I want to branch out. I want to open another big shop right at the bottom of the Merrill Lynch building in the city. The lease is going to cost a lot. I need your blessing." I gave him a blessing, but I told him, make sure to keep the shop closed on the Shabbat. He agreed. We said l'chaim, and business continued to boom. Then he opened another shop around the corner from that new shop for women's suits, which closed after 6 months. He came to complain to me one Shabbat. I said, "Lawrence, you never asked me for a blessing for the ladies' wear." And he's like, "Oh, okay." Now, Lawrence is also something of a gambler, and so a couple of years ago, he bought himself a horse, which he named Menorah. He came to me yet again for a blessing for the horse, and I told him with his racehorse, same terms, no Shabbat. Only this time I got a little smarter, and I also said to him, 10% of whatever you win off that horse, you give to a charity of my choice. We shook. We said l'chaim. 2.5 months later, he calls me up. "Where are you?" "I'm at home." "Are you near a computer?" "Yes." Go to it now and type in this web address while I stay on the phone with you. Okay. Right. I did the racing address. Now watch the race, Rabbi. It's a rerun. And I did. Menorah's in the race. The odds for Menorah are 40-1 on this new horse. So Menorah typically and understandably is trailing so far behind. The odds make sense. Menorah then suddenly is somewhere in the middle. Menorah is suddenly in second place with only 2 more rounds to go. Even the presenter is ecstatic as he announces how Menorah is out in front at the last lap. My heart is beating. I know Lawrence. He likes to gamble. He would have bet a minimum of £1,000 just for the heck of it. At 40-1 odds, that's $4,000 to a charity of my choice. And to my utter bewilderment and joy, Menorah crosses that finish line, winning by a whisker. I said, wow, Lawrence, it's amazing. I can't believe it. He says, guess how much I bet, Rabbi? I hold my breath. Go on, Lawrence, tell me. Nothing. It was Shabbos. And I'm like, what? And then quickly, oh, good for you. You see, Lawrence did what he needed to do because he knew it was the right thing to do. He could have said, deal, shmil, Shabbos, shmabbos. I'm going to make money, but he didn't. He kept to the terms of the deal, much as he might have otherwise not wanted to be bothered to do so. That horse went on to make him some good money, had another baby worth more than the original horse, which he sold off, etc., etc. Because the hard fact is, when you do what you know is the right thing to do, even if you don't want to, it'll all work out to your benefit. Our forefathers are famously referred to as the wheels on God's chariot. Why are they referred to as the wheels? Because we have a term in Hebrew called kabbalat ol, accepting the yoke. By definition, a yoke is what you use to steer an animal. If it wants to go one direction, by way of the yoke, you steer it in a different direction. Your own animalistic self might be inclined to want to do one thing one way that appeals to it, but your innate sense of spirituality harnesses itself to your animal self, if you will, and steers it in the right direction. Our forefathers were utterly subservient to God, like a chariot which is utterly subservient to the rider. They did everything that God wanted them to do. Of course, that's high ground. How do you get there? The answer is the same. Take your ego out of the equation. The can't be bothered is prefaced with it, the I. I am not in the mood. I can't be bothered. But with humility, with some self-abnegation, you'll do it regardless of how you feel about it. And again, as it applies in religion, it applies in relationships, in the workplace, or wherever else besides. But finally, the aforementioned opening of the portion doesn't end there. If you keep my statutes and you adhere to my commandments, then I will ensure, says the verse, that rain falls in its proper time and you'll merit an abundance of blessing. God recognizes the struggle of human nature. When a kid says, why should I? And the reply is always because I said so, that grates. That kid, whether 3 or 33 or 73, has an impulsive resentment to being told what to do. They'll do it, but they might likely also resent doing it. And somewhere down the line, they might reject it. So sometimes an enticement has to be added, something that might incentivize, a little reward for doing what you need to do, even if you don't understand why you have to do it. Bosses do it all the time. You can order your employees to do something that is integral to the company. Sometimes the employee gets it, sometimes they don't. But if the boss is going to be met with, just get it done, don't question me, that's hardly likely that you're going to then bring out the best in that employee. But when operating under the incentive of bonuses, the result is altogether different. We'll be less inclined to challenge and just get on with it. That's the takeaway from the portion. The significance of statutes in the broader scheme of life. You don't always have to get it. Sometimes you just have to do it. And when you do, for your work, your loved one, for God, knowing it's the right thing to do, then that's how you bring blessing into your life and how you will ultimately experience enduring bliss forevermore. And with that, I wish you